Good evening, everybody. It's 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time in beautiful Brooklyn, New York. I always look out the window as if I forget where I am each week. My name is Max Cohen. It is a pleasure, as always, to welcome you all to the MOCA Live podcast. We have a wonderful show today. As I said, I'll be one of your hosts, and joining me to my right, my co-host, as always, that's Mr. Colborne Bell, founder of the Museum of Crypto Art. Colborne, how are you?
I've been better.
Was that not, I've been better?
I'm not bad. I've definitely been better.
We'll see if we can, I don't know, make you either better or hopefully not worse by the end of this podcast. And below me, back to the podcast for I think only the second time. We got to pump up those numbers, my friend. One of the most accomplished metaverse architects in the world, close personal friend, MOCA resident metaverse architect. That's Untitled XYZ. Welcome back to the show, Untitled.
Hey guys, thank you very much for having me.
We are excited to have you for what is sure to be a depressing topic, as seems to be the norm these days. Today's episode was, I think, inspired by news that you shared with us a few days ago. Some somber news that Polygonal Mind, which is the creative studio behind Vipe and crypto avatars, just a really, really influential virtual world metaverse outfit, announced that it was closing down. I think that it bears emphasizing just how much of a pioneer Polygonal Mind was for pretty much everything metaverse over the last 9 years. For those of you that are aware of the news, you would know that this is like a really, I think, terrible loss for the larger metaverse community. And I think for me, it represents something that I think a lot of people in or out of the metaverse or just kind of like in its orbit have been thinking for some time, which is that whatever version of the metaverse we thought we were going to have, that, you know, I spent a long time writing about, that a lot of people, Kirk, Untitled included, have been building for many, many years. That version of the metaverse is probably not what we're going to get if we're going to get a metaverse at all. So let's start with Polygonal Mind, because obviously like that studio did so much in the way of innovation, especially as it relates to like metaverse avatars. I know Untitled, if you were to move your head slightly to the left or right, we would see one of those avatars that is MOCA's resident chief technology officer, Renee, in a Polygonal Mind banana suit, but
chief banana officer,
chief banana, our CBO. Well, I don't know. I eat a banana every morning, basically, like on our weekly calls. So I'm not sure that that's a fair title to just give away. But regardless, Untitled, what does the loss of Polygonal Mind kind of represent to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's devastating. It's honestly, it's really sad. Polygonal Mind has been around for the better part of a decade. They have created in that time 250,000 avatars, and minted these as avatars. And I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they were the first to create a NFT avatar, like a VRM file, and tokenize it. They have created some of the most distinctive architectural works across most metaverse platforms like Decentraland and Sandbox, Somnium Space, voxels. Like, there isn't a world that they did not touch. They were incredibly prolific. And yeah, I mean, it's a team of, I should say, like, it's Toxam, Cynics, Corton, Victor Kunai, Luis, and about, I think, 50 others that they had on their team. And they were doing everything right. They were building out a company, and they were the ones who were there at the starting line to build out all of these incredibly creative projects. And they partnered with some of the biggest brands out there who wanted to collaborate in the metaverse. So it's a huge loss. I think they were deeply inspiring for me and for my work. And they were always an example that I would point to of, look, here's a design firm. They're practicing in the metaverse. They're building things that are imaginative and groundbreaking from a technological standpoint. So it is a huge loss. And I think it just, I think for a lot of builders like myself, a lot of designers like myself, it's discouraging, because you see other projects getting funding and support where they did not, to kind of get them through this hard time. So I'm sad about it. It's a loss.
For sure. And it bears mentioning that Polygonal Mind is not the only like revered kind of metaverse entity to either close or need to like reorient itself in the past, in recent memory. Monaverse, for example, transition to what I believe is just kind of a 3D asset marketplace. And even just like anecdotally, right? Like if we were to come on this podcast a year ago and talk about the most exciting kind of metaverse protocols in general, I would say like Deca or Hyperfi. And even the way that I've seen those being used, there's just so much less like use of those platforms that I'm just anecdotally seeing. Certainly not in like the world of like art exhibitions, which I think was for me where I kind of thought these metaverse platforms would really kind of penetrate into crypto art, that it was like this perfect like match made in heaven use case. Like Untitled, like, I mean, simply like what's happening here? Is this really just like an effect of a change in market conditions? Is this like some kind of downstream of like an overinvestment in metaverse concepts from a couple years back?
Um, if I knew the perfect answer, then we might have, if the answer was easy, I think we would be able to solve it. But I think, a big part of this, frankly, there just aren't a lot of people in these virtual apps right now. That's not like a shocker to anyone. I think like you can look at a lot of the data, and a lot of metaverses don't even share that data anymore because it's so abysmal. It's like the meme. There are literally dozens of us, and they all kind of like hop like me between platforms. And just to give a quick number, I checked a DApp Radar last night, and Decentraland has a couple hundred. And they have a community metrics app that shows like 100. I know the numbers are higher for people who log in without a wallet, but I think generally, like, it's still not a lot. It's still very low, and I think I I think a lot of it ties back to the metaverse land model, which has been a failure. It hasn't worked, and we've talked about this a fair amount in the past. I think I mean, from my background as an urban designer, I'm trained as an urban designer. A lot of these projects like built new towns, new cities overnight with zero planning. They just issued land and sold land, and then were kind of responsible for building out other things over time. But it just, a lot of these things we're seeing, I think, some of the repercussions of that. And I think a lot of metaverse apps have been struggling with a business model. They're trying to figure out what can be sustainable aside from just issuing new land every few months. And they simply, if they have hundreds of users or dozens of users, that's just simply not enough to kind of like combat, you know, like, for example, if you have a couple hundred daily active wallets, but your token, mana token, is worth like $750 million, it's crazy. That's still what it is now. So I think we just have a mismatch, and I think a lot of that has to do with courting the wrong people to be your primary stakeholders. A lot of this is about land flipping, and when it should have been about getting creatives like Polygonal Mind to be the core stewards of these new platforms, partner with them, not land flippers, to kind of help you build out experiences that are special and lasting.
So I want to return to this idea of lasting creative experiences in a moment. Colborne, I'm curious, like when the museum first launched itself in Somnium space, do you have any recollection of like how many people were kind of visiting at that time, or like kind of how populated Somnium felt, even just anecdotally?
There was very few people there, but the people that were there were incredibly excited and incredibly passionate about it. You think about the land, and it was mostly open space. And this was what was so exciting about what we were doing at the time, is that we were inviting artists to conceive of their vision for what these spaces could look like, right? We had this incubator district in 2020 that Untitled was involved in. And this was a major aesthetics leap from the world of crypto voxels into Somnium space, into 3D experiential space. And I think this is what really captivated so many people's attention about what the museum was doing at this time. and then to go and see and experience these works of art, there was a profundity that was deeper than any museum experience that I've ever had about the types of ways we can have social interaction in the future, conversations around art, and just kind of, you know, connections in new environments, new spaces, that were really defying physical reality.
Hmm. The reason I ask is because you know, we had Conlon on, Colin Rios, a few weeks ago, who was like very early in crypto voxels, building there, making connections there, and to hear Conlon talk about it, it was no more than a couple dozen, maybe a couple hundred people at the absolute most. But of course, the vibe was very different back, from what I understand, in 2019, 2020. Having a couple dozen or even, you know, 100 people in a metaverse world or in a virtual world was seen as a huge win. Like, wow, we have this many people in a virtual space. If the metrics are basically the same now, then why, in what is essentially a moment of relative metaverse disinterest, kind of post the like hype cycle of this buzzword, like why is this so different than the 2018, 2019, 2020, before all that buzz, when it was kind of, again, it seemed to me to be more euphoric about the same amount of population, the same number of citizens?
Do you have an answer, Untitled?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I kind of have an idea.
Yeah, share it. I want to hear it.
Well, I think we ran into a bit of an oxymoron when we tried to impose scarcity on top of the digital, right? I think that's why land sales didn't work. I think that's why the thing is that it worked for a while, but it really doesn't work with the advent of AI. And then it gets remarkably existential for people who have, I think, devoted lifetimes, hours, whatever it is, into learning creative processes and programs that may very quickly get replicated. And that's when I think it begins to look more and more almost like a bookmark of a very special period.
Interesting.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I'd agree with that. I think we're at a really, like, it's the best of times and the worst of times, because there's never been more access to technology ever for creatives. And that's incredibly exciting and wild, but there's also, like, it's paralyzing. I think for a lot of people, they don't know which direction to take. That's creators, that's platform owners for these metaverse apps. They don't know where to go because it's so hard to know what the world is even going to look like a couple years from now. Because it, you know, changed so much from a couple years ago, when, you know, now we take it almost for granted that people can generate images of anything in a second. Like, that was unheard of, you know, not that long ago. So yeah, I think it's certainly it's a tricky period, and it doesn't feel the same as in 2018, because I think there's a different feeling when you're kind of like going up the trail to the mountain top for the first time. You're like starting off, you've got all your supplies, you've got good energy, like it's kind of early in the morning. But then, you know, when you realize the mountain is like 5 times taller than you thought, and you're halfway there, you have no water left, and you're sweating, and the sun is going down, and you're like, oh shit, I got to camp overnight. I got to figure out how to weather this and figure out if I need a different path to get up or what have you. So I think a lot of it is it is kind of paralyzing to figure out what direction ultimately the entire internet will be taking. There's new technologies coming out all the time, so it's a lot to figure out, and it's a lot to posture with, because, you know, platforms tend to align themselves with a specific tagline or whatever, and that's tough. It's difficult.
We are in like the Donner Party cannibalization stage of the bear market right? It is just the remaining people who are left just at each other's throats. And go ahead.
I was going to say, do you think that applies to just tech at large? Because the metaverse as a concept it's not necessarily aligned with crypto art, but it does seem to move very um, proportionally to crypto art. Those two things don't, in theory, have much to do with each other, other than crypto art providing, I think, a really good use case for metaverse worlds in the lane of digital art and digital art exhibitions. But yeah, Colborne, like, do you think that's just,
it's just,
again, larger market sentiment?
I mean, it goes back to our bot conversation. You know, when everything is fake, how do you begin to even prove something that's real? And who that is real wants to spend the time sifting through everything that is fake to begin to find something that like connects? I just think there is massive tech fatigue. And the problem is that we are only going deeper and deeper, quicker and quicker down the Neuralink AI, everything connected all the time rabbit hole. And that is very, very distant from our evolution. And I think that will continue to make us ultimately lonelier, seeking more answers, ultimately consuming more. And I just worry.
Well, I'll just throw this in there that I do think that there is I think you hit the nail on the head where it's this larger tech fatigue. The only kind of large scale deployment of new tech that I've seen have any kind of staying power in the last, say, 10 years is AI. And even the way that it's written about now, whether it's, I go through articles all the time for our Sunday newsletters, and it's a lot of like think pieces in the Atlantic talking about like, well, people aren't interested in AI anymore. AI is boring. Or the Wall Street Journal talking about like, there's big business and investment interest in AI, but almost no consumer interest in AI, right? The flash in the pan that was like fever pitch enjoyment and like enthrallment with ChatGPT is over. There's if people were on Twitter over this past week, they probably saw things about Friend, which is like an AI powered like necklace that you wear that this founder spent $1.8 million on just the domain name friend.com, which you shouldn't go to. The product is very strange. And that reminds me of like Rabbit, the other kind of, it was this IRL AI helper that was really just like hardware skin for a ChatGPT like node. And so if we think that like the enthusiasm on AI, at least on a consumer level, is at this kind of standstill, and crypto is still struggling for adoption, and NFTs were going to be this big thing, and then in still the wider world, there's kind of a exhaustion with it. Same thing with the metaverse, where it had this moment and then kind of like petered out in terms of at least like the larger mainstream attention. It does seem just like nobody is interested in new technology, period, or using new technology. The Apple's Vision Pro, I thought, was going to revolutionize how people conceptualize just like a virtual internet. And basically everything I see now is that sales of that were way down. Meta has divested 20% of its, or maybe it was 20 billion. I think it was 20 billion divestment of its metaverse arm. So I think that Colborne, that just to emphasize that, like, I think that that's really prescient, that it's not just the metaverse. It's not just crypto art. It's just like new technologies in general are just not being adopted.
We're just like super post-capitalism, everything accelerating too quickly, all of these efficiency gains and building things that people don't actually want.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. But I should say too, though, like the metaverse, and I know everyone will have a different definition, but the metaverse is inevitable. The evolution of the web is totally inevitable. Like, we're not going to be stuck on 2D screens for the next century. It's inevitable that things will be more immersive and interactive and connected. I think it's just we've had a lot of weird game theory in these early iterations that have flopped because people are literally just copying the real estate market in the real world and impressing those rules, that logic, onto a virtual setting when that doesn't work. Like, I said this earlier today, I was chatting with somebody, but it's like a crisis of imagination, honestly, that we're taking this incredible concept of digitizing, virtualizing everything and the internet, making it a public forum. It's a public space. Let's build it. But then replicating exactly what is already failing for a lot of people, which is real life space. And that's one of the reasons this thing could work, is that the real one doesn't work well for everyone. So let's have an alternative, but wildly unimaginative, like big empty spaces, zero landmarks. Everyone's focusing on getting as many users as they can in there, but then all you have is what, Times Square is like our goal. It's crazy. So I just wanted to say, like, I do think it's inevitable that the internet evolves into this more spatial experience, but these early models, man, they're just like, they're not interesting. They're not creative.
I just want to push back on that only slightly, and it's not necessarily something that I believe, but just, I don't know, a pain point that I envision. I remember when the Nintendo Wii came out. I have no idea what year that was, but I was a kid, and the concept of moving the sword of Link in The Legend of Zelda was, to me, it was revolutionary. The idea that I could even possibly do that, right? That I would sit on the couch with my little Wii joystick and swipe. And then they came out with that game. It was called The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. And it just turns out that the increased effort it took to wiggle my hand to slice monsters was less enjoyable than the relatively laissez-faire affair of just playing with a controller. And the Wii was this revolutionary thing, and then we moved away from it. And now everything's back to controllers and a screen, and the investment of effort turned people away, essentially. And any version of the spatial web, right, which, I also have seen it as an eventuality, and probably do see it as an eventuality. It takes more effort, right? You have to put the goggles on. You have to be in this world. It's very easy to use the internet today, especially with smartphones, in a very distracted and non-engaged way. And you can't do that. Or it doesn't seem to me that unless we have a exponential increase in the tech available, that you'd be able to do that with the spatial web. The question being, do you really see like the metaverse as this kind of like spatial web idea of a 3D digital hallucination as inevitable? And if it is to be inevitable, what kind of product do you think needs to come out to get people back in, right? Do you need some kind of like wild investment a la the Vision Pro from a massive like Apple like entity? Is that the only way?
Colborne, what do you think?
You want me first? I think we will undergo a massive centralization wave with AI that reduces like labor productivity in the real world and pushes people into more digital spaces that are housed by Apple, Microsoft, Google. And then in reaction to that, there will be kind of an akin to the open source movement, a decentralized movement for decentralized spaces. But I think it will only come again once the needle on privacy and data and everything has been poured into these centralized entities where they already possess such a wide gap and advantage in their AI capabilities and processing and understanding of this data.
Yeah, it feels like we're kind of headed towards a split metaverse, right? There's the corporate metaverse, and then there's maybe the kind of grassroots underground metaverse, and those are going to just be forever battling one another in a way. I don't know. That's how I interpret that. I don't think, though, like, so maybe to push back on my own statement, like, because who knows? But I really think it's like a creative problem in a lot of respects. I don't think it's like right now, especially with younger people, you don't need like these incredibly realistic, overly realistic experiences to be entertaining. I think everyone's kind of like bored of the hyper realistic image in some ways. And they're like, well, what's a creative alternative? I think if we treated the metaverse in that way too, and just thought more creatively about the challenge of why would people come together. It's a public space problem, honestly, coming back to like the urban design challenge. And I'm an architect, so I like to think that way. But why would someone come to this plaza? Why would someone come to this public space? What about it is unique? Is there some sort of gathering there, a protest, a game, a celebration, a mourning? Like, what is it that will get people together, and what's sticky? I kind of feel like we just need more interesting rules and logic to kind of like bring people together. And I think NFTs can solve a lot of that or provide for some interesting, methods here. But yeah, I don't know. It's tough because I do also believe that there's such an advantage held by larger companies that are kind of powering the internet, where we spend much of our time on the internet through them. So it is a challenge. It's hard to say.
There's a couple of different ways of looking at that problem, at least in the ways that it's already been solved, right? So one is Fortnite, and which I think is still the most successful model of a virtual world, right? A metaverse, in the sense that it's just a gathering place digitally for people, right? A gathering place with a host of different activities that are incentivized by their own either mania or their own kind of like dopamine addiction cycles. But like, I think that's a model that like really works and has continued to work. People still play Fortnite 6-7 years after its inception. I think the same goes for Roblox. I remember doing research a couple years ago. Half of American children under the age of 16 have played Roblox or play Roblox, which is just stunning. That I think is a little bit, we're starting to go a little bit further afield from a Fortnite, where it's like, here's the game. Right now we're going to like, here are a bunch of games. Here's interacting with people. Here's building your own things. And then the step even further removed from that is Second Life, which has been around for 25 years, right? Which is, I think, more in line with what all of us perceive of as the metaverse, where it's not like there's this game that you're going to play. You're going for the relationships you're having with people within the world. You're going for the identification with a character, with a lifestyle that you have within the world. I met somebody recently, a guy I golfed with, who, as we were talking and I was telling him about what I do, he mentioned that he has a radio broadcast in Second Life, and it's like one of the longest running, or if not the longest running, radio broadcasts in Second Life.
That's
Just this
cool.
like older dude that I'm golfing with, who has this there's the connection, right? The connection is like, I can have a radio broadcast even though I'm not a radio broadcaster, right? But
We need the
all
radio in the metaverse, honestly. Like, that would be so cool to have a channel broadcasting across all worlds that accept it. That'd be sick.
But
Sorry.
it requires no. I think that's an incredible point, but it still requires like a baseline number of people who are already bought in, right? Like, you can't have the game, just like a Fortnite doesn't work as a battle royale model unless you have many, many people playing, to the point that all of these games are so randomized in terms of their elements, in terms of how they look, who you're playing with. Like, you need that initial buy-in.
Well, then start with
Yeah.
ham radio.
Well, fair enough.
I mean, there is internet radio that is widely distributed that you can access at any point. So you don't really need to go into a world to experience that.
Which I think is a really good point, because it makes me wonder how much of the blame, quote unquote blame, is to be placed on the backs of like these platforms themselves, right? Places like Deca or Hyperfi or Decentraland or CryptoVoxels, at not, again, like you said, Untitled, like seeking out creative experiences to then build an audience. Like, I do think that there is this case of like, once you see it, you get it, but it's very hard to see it because none of these things are in your face with its own reason for being, the way a Fortnite is.
I just, real quick, I was looking up, Roblox has 60 million daily active users.
Wow.
Million. Like, we're the most in the metaverse right now is probably a few hundred. Like, yeah, so it's just crazy. That's a different network, and honestly, like a full-on ecosystem. That's just impressive. Sorry, I was distracted. I was what were you saying?
No, I think that's a really, like, what you can do. Yeah, sorry, Colborne, please.
Well, I was just going to say, I think what we tried to create was like Roblox for adults, because that is like the kid envisioning of those spaces. But, I've never been in Roblox. I don't think I would feel comfortable being in Roblox, but it's possible that I would want, a similar type of social and artistic experience as to what Roblox provides.
Well, I would even go a step further than that and say that like that's what Second Life is, right? It's Roblox for adults. I think what we were building here more accurately is like the ability to create a world in which you can play, right? That's what like a Hyperfi is. It's not a game, it's a world in which people can create games. That's what like Nifty Island is, right? It's like go make something within this world. Here are the building blocks to building something, instead of, I think what the Roblox Second Life model, all of these models are, is like, here is your world, go play in it. It's what a World of Warcraft is. All these MMOs, Fortnite says like, we've made a world for you, go do whatever you want. And I think,
But we saw, what was that NFT that was, like 60 ETH, where they just laid out, you have like an amulet and you have these dragonhide boots and
I remember those with the loot.
Thank you.
Loot.
And everybody was like, this is the new paradigm. Just give people like the basic things and then they're going to go and build it. But people don't want to build it, man.
Building's hard.
Yeah, building is super, super hard.
I am so tired of learning all these just SDK after SDK, different rules, different logic. Like, it is a lot. And architects and designers like myself who build in these worlds, man, it is a lot to bounce across all these different places and figuring out the new, Unity kind of model to do it, or web-based model, or code. I mean, all of these platforms. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. I'm getting excited. It's the same with the blockchains that everybody is funding, new protocols. Where are these developers? Like, these developers are not moving out of Ethereum generally to something new. They're generally not migrating downstream. And that is why we're experiencing, I think, like L1 fatigue as well, is that everybody says, go lay a protocol and let other people build on top of it. But nobody really wants to build on top of it.
Yeah, it's an infrastructure bloat issue. Like, it's the same with land and same with blockchains. Like, people are building out so much infrastructure when there are so few users, and especially same thing with building on a blockchain, developers who are capable, who understand how to do that. It's kind of the same thing in a virtual world where you only have dozens of architects who are really able to navigate some of this stuff. Or comfortable rather navigating it. I think that's a big thing. There are plenty of people who know how to model and build amazing things, as evident by Roblox, but it's a comfort thing getting into some of these worlds where there's kind of money involved in a different way and trust in a different way. So yeah, it's a big hurdle.
And the incentive structure is low.
For sure. But it's more like, one thing I really, just to go back to the example of the IOCA, the incubator, like that district of building out an area in Somnium Space where people could come in and build out an art gallery to showcase their work or the work of others. That was one of the most like eye-opening. I know for me, it was very eye-opening. I talk about it a lot as a way of thinking about architecture totally differently. It was my first time in VR. I'll never forget that. And it changed the way that I took this industry seriously as a result. And it's been hard that was magic in the moment, or the bottle, whatever. And
that was 4 years ago now.
It was 4 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think like, it's tough to figure out how to capture that magic again. I do think what I'm seeing is a lot of metaverse apps, like, there's Hyperfi on Cyber, Spatial, Nifty Island. They're building out gaming kind of networks. These are mini games and things like that you can play.
But how can you possibly compete though with these behemoths? Like, no disrespect to any of these platforms, but there's no way they can compete with a Fortnite, right? An Epic Games that has.
This is my point of the centralization, right?
Yeah.
Everything is going to flow through these things. They will decide the pace at which this moves. They will trap everybody in their walled garden. And then effectively nobody will own anything, and there'll be no more jobs. And then everybody's going to throw up their hands and be like, well, we're like way beyond sufficiently entertained with all of this content, AI generated, specialized thing directly for my needs and profiles. And, you know, I don't have any human connection. And I just, it's, you know, I don't want to get like too dystopian, but I don't see it, man. I don't see how we thread the needle on this thing.
Well, the model for exactly what you're talking about is like, I think Twitter, right? When I was a kid, it would be DeviantArt and StumbleUpon and Omegle and all of these different things. But it turns out that rather than having 5 different websites that all provide a different kind of entertainment, just conglomerating basically like the best parts or the most entertaining parts, or certainly the most addicting parts of all of these things on a central social media site is a lot easier, right? I can have way more. I can have that and my news, right? And see like who just signed a large contract with the Hawks. Like but the product is better in the sense that the product is more all encompassing. So why would I ever go to a StumbleUpon to find new information when Twitter provides a depth and amount of new information that even the full internet can't really provide at the speed at which social media provides it?
I'm going to say optimistically, I think there is a way to thread the needle. I think there's a way, because all of us, we're clearly all extremely burnt out from a lot of the kind of repetition here and the big company kind of absorbing and whatever else. I think there's a way to thread the needle where people crave something different, alternative, a new experience, a different way of looking at the same thing. I think it's going to take a little bit of an adjustment of, I think people are okay with a different quality level, and for the sacrifice of having, like, I mean, it's the same reason that, you know, neighborhoods are cool for a while if they're a little grungy or gritty, like, you know, Berlin or Brooklyn, for example, like heavy on the art scene, heavy on the music scene, but then, you know, at a certain moment it gets gentrified and kind of taken over in a different, from a different identity. I think like we still haven't had some of these moments yet that I think could be wildly creative and thread that needle differently. Because I mean, we're all sick of the doom feed on Twitter. I would much prefer a kind of less noisy, healthier environment that's more pleasing to like hang out in, if it were only easier to do that and I could see you guys and talk to you guys there. I don't know. I don't know. I think the trick is a lot of these platforms are focusing on daily active users, which I should push back on my earlier point. I don't know if that's the metric of success. You can't compete with 60 million. You can't compete with Twitter, but you could get a small town kind of vibe on a platform that has a bigger impact. And maybe that's part of it, is like trying to get a critical mass of people that's healthy enough to like either make a living or make a conversation through, but you don't have to compete with something like a Times Square or, you know, giant feed where everyone is just sort of like on top of one another. That's something like Other Side, for example. They're focusing on numbers. They're trying to get thousands and thousands of users simultaneously into the same place. And I've done those demos on Other Side. It's crazy. It's like people climbing on top of one another, screaming on top of one another. It's just like, it's like, you know, the subway or Times Square at rush hour. Like, it is crazy and it's not pleasant.
Yeah, but do you think Other Side ever launches with all its land and all these things that they sold?
You know, I don't know. What did they raise? They raised about $400 million through that sale. It's wild to me that someone like, you know, there's Ash at Hyperfy who's just done it on basically, you know, with 1 or 2 people and no funding, and he has an active platform, more daily active users. So it's, I don't know, man.
Right.
Like it's tough to know.
I mean, these things were at 9 ETH. They were trading at 9 ETH. They're now trading at about 0.1.
Oh yeah, it's brutal. I mean, I own a plot of land from Other Side, and I would love to use it one day. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure.
I mean, you would think they could have delivered something.
they've done a bunch of these demos now. I think they've fallen to a lot of what these metaverse platforms have done is they either overhire or they just spend money like crazy thinking that this is just like a consistent business model, and they spent a lot of money. I know that they made some of the most beautiful trailers for like codas and these different things. Beautiful.
Yeah. This is the long rug.
Yeah, it's tough because I think a lot of these groups are new to making businesses in the first place, and I think that's part of the issue. They don't know how to scale a business, create a 10-year business, not a 2-year business, and a lot of people overhired during the last run. Sorry if you hear my baby in the background.
That's okay. We have all sorts of like small creatures that come in and out of the frame.
Yeah, he might pop in, just his head.
Right.
I think so. I'm reading Neuromancer right now by William Gibson,
Amazing.
which yeah, it's a really good book, and a lot of it is about like this guy who they use the terminology of like jacking into a digital space of like the Matrix, right? And it's like it's a full sensory experience. And one of the most influential texts in that coined the phrase the metaverse is Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, both of which I think were from the late 80s, early 90s. Don't quote me on the years, maybe mid 90s, but either way, like in all of these cases, there are these like sensory experiences, right? You are like fully kind of living in this place. Ready Player One's another example. We are still at this space where like basically to have, a room in which you're hanging out in, right? Even the best possible version of a room you're hanging out in with your friends is still, you are limited by the fact that all you can do is have a microphone and a camera, right? You can be there visually, you can be there audially, but there's not a ton else you can do, right? The experience of being in the room is not present, right? Which is why I think everyone's idea is like, let's get these goggles on your face, right? So you can like, your full frame of vision is in these places, your hearing's fully in these places. But I still think that like there needs to be some kind of like, there needs to be some demonstration of what a killer app looks like to make people want to live en masse in a town, right? To make people want to live, to make people beyond the percentage of the population that wants to exist in a Second Life type structure, beyond that niche that's always going to be revolutionary and introverted and find themselves in a space like that and lust after it. Like there needs to be something that is greater that I'm not sure we can comprehend quite yet. Like
art, man, like you got to give artists a kind of agency to build incredible monuments virtually that people want to see, they'll travel to see. Like I think we focused so much on I don't know, really bland kind of architecture in the metaverse and just repetitive stuff, but we've got to build out more things that are really like if you look at a city, why do people visit New York? It's to see the Statue of Liberty, it's to see Empire State Building, these incredible things that don't exist anywhere else. And I think we have none of that in all these virtual worlds. There's really very little that you're like, oh, I'm going to go to Decentraland to see or I'm going to go to, I feel like that could be, give some land to sculptors and see what happens. But part of me thinks it could be art that really, as it enters this virtual moment and goes beyond this 2D Instagram feed thing, maybe that's an answer that could give us a jolt of adrenaline and help us think differently about some of these spaces. I hope it's that.
Well, I remember some years ago talking to Metageist, who had told me that he did a program with senior citizens where they like drew or painted, and then he digitized those images and put them in a metaverse world and strapped goggles on them. And then they were like looking up agog at these things that they had created that were now like artworks in front of them at some monumental scale. Do you think it's scale? Do you think it's intricacy? Do you think it's creativity? Do you think it's like performance? Like where does the art go in a way that feels like monumental? Is it taking that 420 slot room that you created, Untitled, and putting it in a room where people are tiny and adding all these little spires and spindles and things, and so you're walking around like a space that you've never seen anything that large, but again that requires goggles because otherwise it's capped by the size of the screen.
I think Andres is right. I think it is some version of a MMO in which there are neurofeedback loops running with AI agents that are kind of responding maybe in a Dungeons and Dragons style request to how you are reacting, right? So if you want to go on a fantasy adventure, maybe you are like dropped in a 3D generated village, and you go and you talk to people, and somebody gives you a quest, and then you go on that quest, and it sees how you're responding. Or it's sci-fi, or it's, I think it's, I think it's going to be like very personally tailored. I think people love games and they love distractions, but maybe there'll be a way to like.
But I mean, that's the evolution of video games, but it's still like, I think it eludes for me this idea of like this shared digital spatial web that is not necessarily an individually tailored experience, where people are sharing the same experience, even if it's not like necessarily tailored to them. To walk into a virtual bar and to not have the music playing that you want to hear, but to have like one beat that everyone's listening to. Can those two things coexist?
I mean, the line between what is real and what is fake will be so blurred that I don't think you're gonna want to go into a space where somebody is incentivized to be a troll, or they're screaming into their microphone, or they're yelling epithets, or because in any large public online space, there's somebody who is going to take joy in being a disruptor of that space.
Yeah, I think like I do see a future where it's almost like you have like a world building LoRa almost, right? Like everyone has their own LoRa attached to their headsets where they can build out or have generated in front of them a whole universe based off of what sort of settings that they've decided on. I am curious about how, that's the kind of like, that to me is almost though you have your apartment, you have your house, whatever, you have your world, and then hopefully people will want to go outside. So like the outside part, I think is what you're saying, Max. Like what's gonna be the gathering ground? What's the commons for this? That is, I think, where we can find there'll be interesting ways to kind of merge these private zones that people have and customize. I don't know. It's tough to know what that looks like, but I still think like,
yeah. No, please, what we're gonna finish.
No, I think it's I agree with parts of what you guys are saying, where it's like you're gonna have the super customized environment where it is comfortable to you, it is not troll accessible, and it is fully customized to yours. That's like your room, and you decide what goes on the wall, so you decide what you see. But then going out into an environment to learn or to connect or to socialize, whatever that might look like in the future, I do think those spaces need sculptures, they need monuments, they need some kind of like engageable environment that's designed. But yeah, I think that's where I hope a lot of these metaverses kind of evolve into, these metaverse platforms at least evolve into, where they become kind of these common grounds that I don't know. Big question mark. I'm not sure if there's so many. This is where the paralysis comes in of like all these technologies. It looks so different. Like how could we possibly know what's around the corner with some of this stuff?
And this, I think, is like the reason I titled the podcast announcement the way I did, like the end of the metaverse as we know it, because I do think that like what's coming next is standardization of file types, right? It's centralized agents coming in, providing a spatial internet experience that's better than, like, unfortunately, anything that these small actors can do up front, paving the way for interest. And then once that interest is established, then we can have a decentralization. Then once, everything's using a GLB file or whatever kind of 3D file type we're using, then you can have a hyperfi that builds individual worlds for people, right? You can have architects that are building individual experiences for people based on like what they want, right? So that it's not just like your stock open AI metaverse, it's someone's vision for you. That being the artistry. But until that comes, right, like until there's this standardization, until there's this like proof of concept that allows people to be interested in a really like personal way, I think it's a really hard sell.
Well, it's important to mention, I'm disappointed I haven't mentioned this yet, but beautifulthings.xyz, this is an amazing project that they have done. This is Matt, who's a part of this, used to be part of the Monaverse, and what they've created is there's a prompt mechanism. Sorry, it's with the Apple headset. You're in it, and you can prompt 3D objects to appear in front of you. So you can generate your own 3D artifacts in a virtual kind of hybrid spatial setting. I think a lot of that it's heading towards like prompt-based worlds that are around you. If you can do it with artifacts and different objects that you want to populate your environment with, soon it will be level design. It'll be this whole kind of environment that's a lot more immersive. But you guys should definitely check out Beautiful Things, because
these are just free 3D files.
Yeah, like our rooms, there are rooms on that app. So you can spawn a MOCA room just in through your headset in your environment. And it works on mobile too. I've done it. I've used it on my iPhone. But it spawns 3D objects. It's really, really impressive. And it's just incredibly lifelike to see how they look in kind of this multi-reality environment. But once these headsets, I think, they're going to be a bit cheaper, I think that'll start to really open up how people think about this stuff.
Well, this makes me want to open Blender.
Well, I hope to never model again at some point. It's such a pain in the ass.
Yeah, but you can direct with all these assets.
But yeah, with file types and things, I hope that's something that there's an AI layer that really solves a lot of the compatibility issues just automatically.
I mean, there is, on that, there is like a massive, and I know we're way over time, but who cares? There's a massive economics problem. Unity, which is, of course, like a major, they lose hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Yeah. And they are the de facto standard. So who is really going to float these things, and where does the economics come from?
It's a huge issue. A lot of metaverse apps that we have now, they're Unity based. Their entire worlds are powered by that rendering engine,
which is a like super dead failing company.
It's scary. You're beholden to, and they've changed their subscription models before, and then that really shakes things up, and it's scary, I think.
And then you have Apple making their own file formats and forcing everybody again into their walled gardens to use the standards that they set.
Shout out to Hyperfy, who's just doing it all locally. There's no rendering engine. It's just all on your computer. But yeah, I think this is a challenge where hopefully there are going to be more options in the future that are less dedicated to like a company that can change the rules on you. Maybe that's the straw that breaks the camel's back, where it'll really shift the gaming experiences as we know it. If something that powers Roblox decides to tweak a rule, and then all of a sudden subscriptions start eating the world. I don't know.
Well, it does feel like the metaverse will be evolving at a crawl step, like very slow step by very slow step, instead of, I think, how I was picturing it as all at once. No one's going to solve the whole problem. I don't like, that's what Vision Pro represented to me, was like, okay, no one's going to solve this problem with one single advancement. It's going to be all these disparate parts from all these disparate places, and they're all going to have to come together organically in order for people to buy in. But it will look, I think this has been a really cool podcast to just talk about like what that might look like and how it might get there.
I mean, my question is, Max, do you want it?
I think that that's a non sequitur. And the reason why is because I don't think it'll be for me. I think that this will be for the people who are playing Roblox, the 60 million users who are so accustomed to living each day partially in a virtual world. I think for their kids, whenever that may happen. But I think that like, I just turned 29. Like, I think that I'm already aged out of it. That's probably not going to be where I spend my time. There will probably always be a large contingent of people my age and older who are not really willing to spend all their time in a digital world, and kids are going to, and we're going to all be, parents looking at these children and saying like, I don't understand the youth these days. All they want to do is loop into their headsets and hang around a virtual fireplace with their friends. Why go outside and play something, the way my parents used to yell at me to not play another hour of Modern Warfare 2.
I guarantee you your parents said the same thing about the internet and the iPhone, smartphones. Like, of course you're going to be in these worlds.
But again,
probably reluctantly going to want to be there, but that is where society has moved.
But I return to the element of like technology. My whole life was about making things easier, more convenient, less effort. And now we are moving to away from that, right? Making things richer via more effort. You're going to have to put something on. You're going to have to go into a world and spend time there. And you're going to have to make those choices. It was really easy for me to play 2 hours of World of Warcraft every day when I was a child because I had nothing else to do. But as an adult, you have to like make these, you know, you have to make choices between these things. And I think that like this will appeal to people more who are native within it. Andre Stelvecchio in saying, I think you'd be surprised by how many artists spend their time on Discord building a Minecraft neighborhood. I think I would be surprised.
But I imagine, I imagine they're not compensated for those efforts.
I've never played.
Well, I think
Minecraft.
that's part of the magic sauce, though. Like that's why I'm skeptical of incentivized social media and everything else. If you incentivize every action, then a lot of the magic that happens where people are creating something, it changes. It becomes a job. I think a lot of like Roblox, a lot of the incredible things that people have just made, post on YouTube, and young people just watch the YouTube tutorials of people making these incredible things. That's been the reward, and it hasn't been financially motivated at all. I think the metaverse as we know it now could use a little bit of that magic where it's not so much about the financial motivation. It's maybe a little bit more about the kind of like art of making it or the impact it might have. And then I don't know.
We had that magic. We lost that magic.
Oh no.
Imagine convincing people again to do it.
If we had it once, we can get it back.
You think so?
I mean, if it exists, then if it is proven to have existed, then it is.
There's nothing like
proven
the first
to be able
time,
to
Max.
exist again.
There's nothing like the first time.
That's what they tell me. Anyways, we could go on for another hour as usual, but why don't we wrap up here with a lot of I don't knows and maybes and who the fuck knows. Untitled, before we get out of here, do you have anything you want to say to the people? You want to just take the floor for a moment and tell everyone what you got going on, where they can find you, what you want them to know?
Sure. Yeah, find me at untitledxyz_. Yeah, I guess to just wrap back to the beginning, I'm grateful to teams like Polygonal Mind. I think they are rare folks in this scene. They are extremely genuine. I'm excited to see what their team breaks out to do next. And I'm sad. I would hope that this is a lesson for a lot of those who do have the resources that they might have courted to get support. I hope that the next time comes where these builders are rewarded appropriately and given the ability or at least the opportunity to keep going. Like at the very least, we fund too much garbage in this scene. And there are so few actors who have the right intentions. They might not be as loud, but I think they are very much worthy of support because they make this scene better. So I owe a debt to these guys, and I'm grateful for their work. And yeah, I'm hoping that we can preserve it and continue their legacy on.
Wonderful.
Who did we lose? We lost Max?
I think we lost Max.
Shout out you, Untitled. Shout out Polygonal
Say it
Mind.
again,
Can you
Max.
see me?
We lost you.
Are we good? Sorry, I was going to say shout out you, Untitled. Shout out Polygonal Mind. Shout out Andre Stelvecchio in the chat. Shout out the 1998 Robin Williams movie, What Dreams May Come. Shout out World of Warcraft. Shout out you, Colborn. Shout out everyone listening, watching, following along with us. If you liked what you heard today, please give us a like or a 5-star rating on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. I did check. 10 people have given us a 5-star rating on Spotify. That's pretty cool. I would have guessed no one. So please keep doing that. Do it again if you like. Please check out our Substack at museumofcrypto.substack.com. We got newsletters twice a week, usually. Definitely once a week, but they're coming. Colborn, Untitled, thank you both very much. Thanks, everyone, for being here. And a pleasure as always. Take care, everybody. And we'll see you soon.